Bom dia a todos. Estamos na sessão do Seminário Permanente de Racionalidade, Crítica e Diálogo da antiguidade à contemporaneidade, um seminário que iniciamos em setembro e esta é a nossa quarta edição. Temos hoje o professor Christoph Asmuth, da Universidade Augustana de Neuendettelsau, na Baviera. O professor Christoph Asmuth, I want to thank you a lot for coming and presenting for us this paper on In Search of Lost Nature, the ambivalence on the modern concept of nature in Fichte and Schelling. O professor Asmuth é um dos grandes especialistas na filosofia do idealismo alemão, um dos mais representativos e conhecidos na Alemanha. Ele é aqui um amigo de Coimbra. Há quase 30 anos tivemos a sua primeira visita e já veio mais algumas vezes. Temos tido um intercâmbio e um relacionamento bastante frutuoso em termos científicos também. O professor Christoph Asmuth tem vários livros publicados e editados, não só sobre Fichte, sobre Schelling. Tem um livro recente sobre a teoria da imagem e vários outros, um grande número de artigos e capítulos de livros, sendo uma das pessoas com uma produção mais vasta e interessante sobre o campo do idealismo alemão e as suas influências e ressonâncias também na contemporaneidade. So, Professor Christoph, thank you again. The word is yours.
Thank you very much, Diogo, to invite me here to Coimbra, to be here, to stay here, to speak to you here. Thank you very much. I will speak in English. My English is not very good. You may apologize, please, but it is better than my Portuguese. Okay. And you have a translation. I don't get it on my own. We have new programs doing that for us. And I read it yesterday and found some mistakes in it. I don't know how it is in Portuguese. You have a Portuguese version, I think. Maybe it's not as good as my German. You will see. We will see how it works. If I'm going to if my lecture is too boring for you, please don't hesitate to interrupt me at any time. It might be a better way to stay lively with this stuff. I will start now. In Search of Lost Nature, the ambivalence of the modern concept of nature in Fichte and Schelling. We live in the Anthropocene, at least. That is the popular view of our current historical position. The term Anthropocene is intended to express that we now live in a geological epoch in which the Earth is shaped by human intervention. This view is driven by insights into the catastrophic developments of global warming, accelerated by littering of the oceans with plastic and microplastics, exacerbated by disastrous wars and by a hunger for cheap consumption, cheap meat, and agricultural land. Anthropocene is a difficult term because it implies anthropocentrism, which has become deeply problematic in post-structuralist discourses, analysis for various reasons and with various intentions. What's more, by focusing on the Earth, Gaia, as some more elegantly put it, a certain geocentrism is also returning, which has actually been socially unacceptable since Galileo and Copernicus. This is typical of modernity. We seek clarity in concepts. Indeed, we miss this clarity. However, clarity has been irretrievably lost to us, at the latest with the realization of Aristotelian essentialism is no longer compatible with the advent of modern science. Function has replaced essence. We no longer ask, what is this? What is the essence of this thing? Instead, we ask, how does it work? This change affects all major problem complexes, including the question of nature. We no longer know what nature is and can only talk about nature by examining the functional context in which nature is discussed, or more precisely, researched and philosophized about. This leads to ambivalence. I would like to illustrate this dazzling ambiguity and variability of the concept of nature with an example from the early modern period. This return to the past is not solely due to historical curiosity. Rather, it is a look back at the emergence of a coordinate system that is still in force today. This coordinate system maps out the decisive parameters of our understanding of the world and ourselves. And the discussion about the Anthropocene shows that this coordinate system is still very effective when it comes to the concept of nature. Roughly speaking, the concept of nature underwent a profound change and became both modern and ambivalent at the very moment when the mechanistic view of nature was corrected by an organic one. Whereas the functioning of nature had previously been symbolized as a meshing, for example, a clock, the model of organism now gained in importance. In Germany, Immanuel Kant's work is particularly influential in this regard. His third critic, the critic of judgment, paved the way for a comprehensive organological view. At the very end of the 18th century, a new view of nature also developed explicitly. These considerations were fueled by a reflection on life, a reflection that freed itself from the shackles of the Christian religion in order to examine life biologically. In 1797-98, at the age of barely 20, the young and philosophically precocious Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph Schelling quickly gained an overview of the current discussions in the natural science of his time. He published one important book on natural philosophy after another. Natural philosophy, incidentally, sounds familiar, but around 1800, the term was a completely new designation for a philosophy oriented towards the present. Above all, Schelling initially seemed to want to use the term not only to describe a part of philosophy, but to have natural philosophy dominate the whole of philosophy. This can certainly be seen as continuation of Kant's philosophy. And he seems to see himself as a pupil of Johann Gottlieb Fichte, whose Grundlegung der gesamten Wissenschaftslehre, Foundations of the Entire Science of Knowledge, had caused a sensation in 1794-95. Fichte could not appreciate the natural philosophy ambitions of the younger man, whom he considered his pupil. Worse still, Fichte began early on to shower Schelling's natural philosophy with critical, then disparaging remarks. This reveals clear differences between two philosophers, a striking example of a difference in their views or approaches will be presented here by way of introduction. It concerns the phenomenon of animal movement and its explanation in the context of a philosophy of nature. An example, it concerns the question of the liveliness of nature. Schelling wrote as early as 1797, the faculties of animal organs, sensitivity, irritability, and so on, presupposed an impulsive principle without which the animal would be incapable of responding to external stimuli. And it is only through the free reaction of the organs that the externally applied stimulus becomes a stimulus and an impression. There is complete interaction here. Only through external stimuli is the animal determined to produce movements, and conversely, only through his ability to produce movements within itself does the external impression become a stimulus. Therefore, neither irritability without sensitivity nor sensitivity without irritability is possible. In this passage from Ideas for a Philosophy of Nature, we see that Schelling adopts the concepts of transcendental philosophy, Kant, Maimon, and Fichte, and transforms them into a modern biological discourse. Fichte addresses the same topic around 1800 in a few manuscript pages, which will be discussed again later, namely the sentences explaining the nature of animals. Here, he discusses the differences between movements. Here he discusses the difference between animals and plants in terms of movement. Fichte writes, in it, the plant, and its sphere of activity, all movement emanates from its center and returns to it. In the animal, every possible point, inasmuch as it contains a peculiar principle of movement, is the center of a plant atmosphere as its lower world. The animal would thus be a system of plant souls, and the plant an isolated, severed part of an animal. Both interact with each other. The immediate suspicion here is that Fichte's remarks originated in a pre-scientific sphere, while Schelling's remarks seem to be charged with the latest findings, concepts and terms of natural science of his time. Schelling has a sophisticated arsenal of criteria at his disposal, while Fichte indulges in methodologically fruitless speculations that ultimately leads to a reduction to a theory of the soul. At the same time, it becomes clear that the idea of interaction is central to both philosophers, an explanatory model favored first by Fichte and then by Schelling, which both took from Kant's philosophy. My lecture is divided into three parts. First, Fichte's first theory of science is at the center of the considerations in order to show how the world and with it nature is constituted by the idea. Schelling's philosophy, second part of nature, is then the subject of the second part. The focus is on an idea of Schelling that shows how his concept of nature differs fundamentally from Fichte's. Nature as subject. The third part turned to Fichte's conception of nature, nature as object. I come to the first part. If nobody has questions. No. Okay. Fichte's constitution of the concept representation. Representation is a little bit tricky word. It is in Germany Vorstellung, to put something before, to have something before for you. Representation is it is no word in English. I don't know if there's any, but if you find some, I would be thankful. Fichte's constitution of the concept representation, prerequisites of the concept of nature. In 1794-95, Fichte's foundation of the entire science of knowledge was published. Friedrich Schlegel considered it, alongside Goethe's Wilhelm Meister and the French Revolution, to be one of the great trends of the age. It is a central document of the philosophy of the 18th and early 19th century. Nevertheless, the history of this first science of knowledge is a history full of misunderstandings. The science of knowledge assumes that there is real, an example, certain knowledge. Fichte's example of such knowledge is the logical, seemingly banal statement A equals A. After the three fundamental paragraphs, the theoretical part develops the idea, the Vorstellung, as such scientifically, an example, genetical from his highest principle. It is a common misconception to assume that Fichte wanted to develop a subjective idealism based on the premise, I think of the world as I like it. On the contrary, the constitution of the subject is supposed to justify the validity of the idea, the Vorstellung, together with the categories, in example, the objectivity of the idea. For Fichte, Vorstellung, idea, representation, is object, consciousness, or, as he later explains, knowledge of something as knowledge of something. This knowledge of something is characterized by a basic conceptual structure, namely with categories. This refers, as it were, to the generic concept under which Fichte can then subsume a concept of nature. For something encompasses all objects that can exist in space and time, and that is nature. For Fichte, knowledge must be a system. An example, a coherent and consistent rule, which is therefore subject to the primacy of unity. According to Fichte, this basis of knowledge cannot be found in any statement or assertion of fact. For a fact is merely something objective, something rigid and fixed. The principle, however, must be a productive principle, an act of fact. The principle must be presupposed by the opposition of subject and object, otherwise it would be one-sided. Fichte therefore also calls it subject-object. The act is the active, absolute ego, and the sentence, proposition, with which the science of knowledge begins as a science is therefore I am, or the ego originally posits its own being. This proposition is unconditional. It is self-evident. For the ego, being and positing on oneself are the same thing. The act or the ego thus unites both movements, being and action. All categorical determinations of object knowledge are suspended here in the pure thinking of the absolute ego, because their validity must first be established. The only categorical function that the absolute ego has in relation to the categories is that the nature of the ego's action determines the category of reality. Whatever is real only because the absolute ego transfers reality to it. There are numerous difficulties associated with this representation of foundation. These include the question of how such a dynamic of foundation can be represented in an objective proposition at all. Furthermore, the question arises as to how such an act of truth can be conceived without practice, without purposes. Finally, there are problems with the concept of absolute unity, which Fichte takes as his basis here. However, it is precisely this problem that drives Fichte's argument forward. Another action of the ego, which is also unconditional, but only in form, is opposition. The ego is opposed by the non-ego. The non-ego, therefore, does not destroy the absolute unity of the ego, since opposition is an action of the ego. Rather, the positing of the non-ego denotes another type of action of the ego, namely opposition, which has opposition is opposed to positing. The antithetical action of the ego, which posits something that is merely formally different from the ego, nevertheless leads to the contradiction with the principle of unity. Thus, not only does the non-ego contradict the ego and the ego contradict the non-ego, but more complexity. From the opposition of the non-ego, it follows that the ego is not positive. But it also follows that the ego must be positive because it is opposed. Now, this cannot be the final word, because the proposition of opposition is subject to the primacy of unity, to the primacy of the acting self. In the self, the ego, the self and the non-self are opposed. If the unity of consciousness is to be possible, then the self and the non-self must be compatible with each other. The idea that achieves that this is that of limitation or divisibility. I and not I, self and not I, and not self, ego and not ego are not opposed at all, but limited. In example, partiality opposed. The third principle is therefore I opposed the divisible I with the divisible not I in the I. The totality of reality is now placed partly in the I and partly in the not I. Specifically, that reality is placed in the I, which is not placed in the not self, and vice versa. Thus, both are something, the self and the non-self, and they do not cancel each other out. This is the synthetic act of consciousness. What has Fichte now achieved? The absolute I is and remains indivisible. Nothing can be opposed to it. The divisible I, however, is opposed to the non-I, and in this respect is also opposed to the absolute I. Fichte can thus conclude that the I is both identical with itself and opposed to itself. The sentence which the theoretical part of the science of knowledge begins, and under which all theoretical knowledge must be subsumed, is the ego posits itself as limited by the non-ego, I and non-I. At the end of the theoretical part, there must ultimately be the deduction of the idea. At the beginning of the theoretical part, the non-ego, non-I, is still nothing at all. It must first be shown how, in a transcendental way, the non-ego, non-I can attain reality. This path ends with a theory of the power of imagination, an absolute mediating instinct. Fichte describes its activity as hovering between irreconcilable opposites. The concept is not yet fully explained here. Imagination creates space and time, and in abstract terms, in terms of possibility, everything that can occur as content of imagination. In perception, it is still merely a floating, an infinite boundary between going out and restriction. In addition to the productive activity of the imagination, which is unconscious to the empirical ego, there must be another activity that fixes and retains what it perceived. Fichte calls this preserving activity understanding. It creates consciousness. It truly imagines. To it, what it imagines seems to be outside of itself. In a word, only the understanding, Verstand, relates to perception, and for Fichte, that means the activity of imagination. Does the real world appear? The non-ego has gained reality. It is real for an imagining subject. It has become something independent from a mere negation of the ego. It can be addressed as a world of nature. However, this does not mean that the self is yet at one with itself. It is opposed by nature or world that is nothing less than the non-self. This is a fundamental contradiction between the unity of consciousness and the nature opposed to it, which can only be bridged by a sense of beauty. At first glance, Fichte's reflections seem to be confined to the field of pure epistemology. However, in the wake of the old, Fichte develops a practical part of science of knowledge that leads to the primacy of practical. The self, which ought to be at one with itself, becomes the expression of the moral law, a shortened version of categorical imperative. Nature cannot be understood as creation. Nature is structurally transformed by the logical forms of ego and ultimately dominated by the reality of the ego. Nature is non-ego, non-I, the negative side of the ego, that which the ego is not. Nature is therefore subject to the primacy of the practical. It can be abolished, not de facto, but intelligibly. And it should be abolished. The ego has an unlimited claim to power over it. We will return to the consequences of this later. I come to the second part. Questions? Please.
Thank you for the presentation. So, I'm not a Fichte expert, right? So, one of the ideas that I have for this author is his contribution to be this idea of subjectivity, intersubjectivity, right? So, when I first saw this representation as a concept, my first thought was this bit, and also what I've studied in social psychology, where social representations, as coming from social action by the ones like Serge Moscovici and some others in French school, they have brilliant contribution for this. So, do you think this idea of representation as posed by Fichte in this like more intersubjective manner has something to do with this, so the way this idea of representation was further on developed in the social psychology sphere? I don't know if you are aware of such.
Yes, I see.
Yeah.
I will formulate a short answer.
Okay.
A big question.
Okay.
In the later system, if you call it like that, in Jena, before the new century begins at 1800, Fichte constructed a new theory of sociality based on this idea, I, not I. Why do we accept non-I, that you and we are all non-I? For me, you are non-I. Why do we accept them as humans, as subjects, if you want to use this plural form? It is a very interesting concept which leads to Hegel's theory of recognition in the later writings. It's a form of recognition. We recognize the other as the same than me. Therefore, we have a very free. We say in Germany, we say it is the early socialism. Early socialism before socialism is coming on in the 19th century. It's a special term, Frühsozialismus, early socialism, in the historical science in Germany. It is not adequately because it's something else. It has to do with the French Revolution and so on. It's a brotherhood in French, the fraternité. That is the point. He's matching with his theory. It is developed directly from this theory, and therefore you have a link between this theory of ego and not ego, I and not I, and the social meaning of this, which is put in the quotation of Schlegel. It's one of the great strands in the century, Fichte and the French Revolution. He is a revolutionary thinker in this time.
So it was an inspiration for that kind of revolution.
He writes a lot, some essays on the French Revolution, where he defends the radical Jacobean points in the revolution. He do not directly say it's okay that they lose their heads in Paris in this time. He is full of empathic motions in these essays. Yeah, there is a point there is a link to do that, and
it almost seems like a proto-sociology.
it's but it's more in Hegel than
More in Hegel.
Here it is a theory of constitution. It is it's going on the is it legal to start a republic in Germany? Is it okay that we do that? I said it is because it is. I write it in my Wissenschaftslehre.
Thank you.
Some more points here? Questions?
Okay.
Yeah,
I have a second question, but I don't want to deviate too much.
No, it's
I don't
okay.
know if this concept of Anthropocene is going to be retrieved again in the article, but I do have a question about that concept. But
Okay.
Are you going back to that concept?
I'm coming back at the end. At the end,
Yeah,
I will.
I'll wait for that. Thank you.
I have I'm here because I have a grant for the Anthropocene theory critic and so on from Volkswagen Stiftung. It's they build cars and they have a big institution to give grants and so on.
Yeah. Okay, I'll wait for that. Thank you.
They build cars and they give grants to criticize the Anthropocene.
Yeah. No, not the critics. It's not a critic to the Anthropocene. It's a critique of the concept of Anthropocene.
Yeah.
I'm not going to criticize global warming and something. That's not the point. Is the idea of the grant is with some colleagues they examine popular stuff like Marvel comic movies and so on, how it corresponds to this idea of Anthropocene. And there are some hidden religious roots in this discussion. This was a critical point, not to
One of the authors that we study here with Professor Diogo is Bruno Latour.
I mentioned him with Gaia. You know this term. Yeah, this was a sidestep.
If I may, we sometimes speak about this catastrophism and this the religious meaning also of all this extinctionism and catastrophism. That's for some authors is linked into Anthropocene.
It's very interesting. I will go on and you. There's a way back to the Anthropocene.
Okay, thank you.
Second part, Schelling's approaches to a philosophy of nature. The phrase nature as subject comes from Schelling himself, from a short work entitled Introduction to the First Draft of a Philosophy of Nature, or on the concept of speculative physics and the internal organization of a system of this science, from 1799. Nature as subject is a phrase that expresses a departure from the philosophy of Kant and Fichte, along with a new conception of nature. Schelling introduced his ideas on the philosophy of nature in 1797 with a number of considerations that hint at a departure from Fichte's position. Schelling argues, for example, that those who explore nature directly, who study it empirically, are just as unwilling to question nature philosophically as those who enjoy its riches. However, one of the central questions of philosophy is not the central question, is how nature is possible at all. Natural scientists and nature lovers belong to the philosophically naive. They do not distance themselves from the nature, but remain in it, collecting and observing what happens, marveling and admiring, or incorporating nature into themselves. Opposite him stands the philosopher. Schelling explains the Genesis in terms of idea history. In the philosophical state of nature, man lived in unity with nature and with himself, a kind of paradise. The reason for the expulsion from paradise was the human spirit. Verstand, Reflexion. It was thanks to this spirit that they strove from freedom, striving to break free from the shackles of nature and his providence and surrender to the uncertain fate of their own prowess. The goal was return to the first state of unity, but now through their own strength, through their own merit as victors. The first differences between humans and nature gives rise to reflection. The first difference between humans and nature gives rise to reflection. From now on, this separates what nature had united forever, separates the object from perception, the concept from the image, and finally, by becoming his own object, himself from himself. Originally, there was a balance between man's powers and his consciousness, as balance that man is able to upset through freedom only to regain it again. From this we can conclude the following. Schelling consistently assesses the natural state of man positively. In this state, man is at one with himself and nature, a state that must be restored after separation. Second, unity with nature is prerequisite for any form of difference. Third, Schelling views the role of reflection as entirely negative. For him, it is a sign of separation and ultimately something that must be overcome. Fourth, for him, philosophy is the vehicle of return. Thus, philosophy itself is the act in which reflection is overcome. All four positions show a more or less clear distinction from Fichte. In particular, the prior unity of nature and spirit, analogous to the story of paradise, is likely to be incompatible with Fichte's conception. Schelling seems to have been inspired by natural phenomena such as magnetism, electricity, galvanism, and chemical processes to ask more far-reaching questions, as his ideas on the philosophy of nature show. A purely mechanistic explanation did not seem adequate for him. For Schelling, this is evident in living organisms. But organization produces itself, springs from itself. Every single plant is only the product of an individual of its species, and so every single organization produces and reproduces only its own species ad infinitum. Thus, no organization progresses, but returns infinitely within itself. An organization as such is therefore neither the cause nor the effect of anything outside itself. An example, nothing that interferes with the mechanism. Schelling's dissatisfaction with the natural science and natural philosophy of his time stems from the fact that they have been unable to develop a concept of the connection between spirit and nature. For Schelling, it is clear that it makes no sense to reduce this connection to one of the two poles, spirit or nature. Either this results in an empty philosophy of reflection, an idealism without substances, or in a realism that is ultimately empiricism or materialism, in any case a philosophy that cannot explain what it's supposed to explain. For Schelling, organic nature in particular points to the solution, for in it the human spirit recognizes self-organization matter. But because organization, according to Schelling, can only be conceived in relation to spirit, the idea of the original union of spirit and matter arises in the organism. Ultimately, one must consistently think of spirit and nature as one. Schelling ultimately celebrates this idea with emphatic words. As long as I myself am identical with nature, I understand what living nature is as well as I understand my own life. I comprehend how this general life of nature manifests itself in the most manifold forms, in gradual developments, in gradual approaches to freedom. As soon as I separate myself, and with me all ideals from nature, they remains, I am left with nothing but a dead object, and I cease to understand how life outside myself is possible. By 1799, Schelling's position had already become systematic. Schelling envisaged a novel connection between the ideal and the real, which corresponds to a demand made in 1797 work Ideen, a work called Ideen. Nature should be the visible spirit, the invisible nature. To achieve this, however, he had to abandon or at least correct Fichte's transcendental philosophical theory, according to which nature is essentially not self. But how can nature be anything other than an object? Schelling answers lies in the accentuation of productivity in matter. The regularity in all movements of nature, the sublime geometry, for example, which is exercised in the movements of the heavenly bodies, is not explained by the fact that nature is the most perfect geometry, but conversely by the fact that the most perfect geometry is the productive force of nature. Here Schelling simultaneously arrives Here Schelling simultaneously arrives at the conceptual separation of world and nature. If the world is for him the epitome of all phenomena, then the decisive difference of nature is that it is not a mere product, but then it is itself productive, natura naturans. Drawing on Fichte's metaphor of the imagination floating, which was extremely significant in the history of ideas, Schelling can describe nature's constant transition from production to product and from product to renewed production as a kind of floating. This floating, Schweden, is not something external to nature, but is essential to it, a sign of its spirituality, its animation, and ultimately its interaction. Insofar as we conceive of the whole of objects not merely as products, but necessarily also as productive, productive, it rises for us to the level of nature, and nothing else is designated by the concept of nature, even in common parlance. We all call nature as mere product, natura naturata, nature as object. We call nature as productivity, natura naturans, nature as subject. All theory is based on this alone. Schelling had already read a similar idea in Jacobi, who, in appendix to his book on Spinoza, on the doctrine of Spinoza in letters to Mr. Moses Mendelssohn, Breslau, 1789, appendix 1, quotes an excerpt from Giordano Bruno. There, Jacobi speaks on behalf of Bruno, subject of nature. The formless but creative matter was an idea that Schelling was able to take up. However, Jacobi's concept of the subject must still be understood in its old meaning as substrate, not in an epistemological sense as the cognizing entity opposed to the object. On the occasion of a new edition of his Ideas on a Philosophy of Nature in 1803, Schelling added some reflections to his introduction that reveal the direction to his project of philosophy of nature had taken. In retrospect, he felt that his reflections from 1797 were heavily influenced by Fichte's philosophy, which he now characterized as relative idealism. Schelling thus revealed the accusation that Fichte's philosophy of the self was one-sided. For Schelling, the condition of all philosophy is the insight that the absolutely ideal is at the same time the absolutely real, a position that described in various formulations the program of the so-called identity philosophical phase. The concept of imagination now becomes central to Schelling, a shift from transcendental imagination to a system-forming functional concept. Schelling now conceives of the absolute as a unity of three units, each of which is absolute in itself, forming the absolute in three instances. The absolute, I quote, is therefore only the absolute without further determination. In this absoluteness and internal action, it is one in the absolute sense, and yet in this unity, it is immediately again to totality, namely of the three units, that in which essence is absolutely formed into form, that in which form is absolutely formed into essence, and that in which these two absolutenesses are again one absoluteness. This absoluteness is imagined as infinity in finitude, and thus distinguished from the absolute. This is Schelling's concept of nature. In nature itself, the absolute is present and contained like a point, like an eye point and vanishing point. It permits a nature which does not lose its character of infinite finitude, but represents infinity as imagination in finitude. These three instances of the absolute are therefore reflected in nature. They are the three powers of Schelling's philosophy of nature. The first unity, which in the imagination of the infinite in the finite is itself the imagination, is represented in the whole by the general structure of the world, and in particular by the series of bodies. The other unity, the reduction of the particular to this universal of essence, is expressed by always in subordination to the real unity, which is the ruling unity of nature in the general mechanism, where the universal or essence throws itself out as light, the particular of body, according to all dynamic determinations. Finally, the absolute fusion or indifference of the two unities, yet in reality, is expressed by the organism, which is therefore itself again not as a synthesis, but as a first, the essence of the first two units and the perfect counterpart of absolute in nature for nature. If you want to visualize these things, it's done. It's already done. You can see it here. It's a picture of Philipp Otto Runge. It's contemporary at 1808. It is. I think it's the best visualization of Schelling's thinking about nature. You see the dark matter in the margin here, and then it's coming to develop the organism from the ground, and then in the sky you see the spirit. This is a very interesting point. You see, it's far away. You need a scientist who can read these pictures. And I'm not able to do this for you. It's a lot of things in it to discover. It's something of Christianism. You see, in the middle on the grass is a baby. It's the birth of Christ, and at the same time the birth of spirit. A lot of this kind of aurora. Lilies, you see the flowers coming out. It's very interesting to see this as a picture, and you have an idea of the great harmony of the thinking of Schelling, the nature and man as one and the same. It's called morning. If you have a look outside of your window, you will see the morning. The light in the morning is very clear. You see it here. And it's the moment when the nature awakes. Okay.
So the woman in the center is nature, or?
No, it is not nature or spirit. It is nature and spirit at the same time.
In the center.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is. It's not only one symbol for one thing. It's a lot of symbols for the whole epoch. Thinking about nature. It is religious. It is Naturphilosophie, philosophy of nature, like Schelling thought. It is theory of colors, like Goethe did and Schopenhauer and so on. Schelling has some remarks on the meaning of colors, theory of colors. And this is the same. It is a symbol for the one process of from nature to spirit.
It's a great bench.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I saw it a long time ago it is in Hamburg in the north of Germany, Kunsthalle Hamburg. It's here he made Philipp Otto Runge made a smaller one. It's called the Little Morning, and it's a great morning. Yeah? Two pictures, and if you come to Hamburg, you don't miss to visit Philipp Otto Runge, a great romantic painter, one of the greatest romantic painters in this time. He was not. He died. He died early.
Romantic, right?
It's totally romantic. Totally.
It even resembles, like, in more political philosophy kind of things, the ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is Jean-Jacques Rousseau with a German brain, thinking by a German brain. That's what Schelling is doing. But not political. Schelling is not a political thinker.
Yeah.
Don't think as he wrote not very much about politics. He's a kind of melancholic figure in the German idealism. He don't want to have a lot of to be too common with the world. He has no idea of proto-sociology. Yeah. There's no
intent there.
No intent there. No, not very much. No revolution.
Yeah, this resembles like paradise, very pure, very stable, very colorful. Right?
Yeah.
So,
it is. I think they remark it here in this text. It's not from me. It's from. I'm sorry. It's from Wikipedia. The information's here. It's very. It's very symmetric. And it's this is not typical for this period. It's very symmetric here. It's like Baroque art, not like romantic, but it is a deep romantic. To see the dark, it's interesting. It is not only you think it's harmony, but it's the idea that all comes from the dark bottom. It's not.
The dark is a bit hidden, right? Is it in the bottom, like the center form of the painting?
Yeah.
It is the part of the purity and the light. The dark is. It's there, right? But it's
more in Schelling, in later Schelling. I will make some words about this in later some words about these dark points in this. Here it is. It's harmonized, and so like to see it here. Afterwards, it's going to be something in God, dark in God, a dark ground, dark thing in God, where everything is coming out.
That in God, which is not God.
Yeah, something you think God is not God.
The ground of God, the dark ground.
Dark ground of God. Yeah, it's a very. It's interesting, but I'm not here to defend this.
Just out of curiosity, I didn't quite get whether Philipp Otto Runge was being explicitly influenced by Schelling, like if he had read Schelling, or is this just some sort of cultural coincidence?
I think it's mostly it's a coincidence, but there are some reflections of Runge that he possibly read the system of idealism from of transcendental idealism from Schelling in the early 1800 years. There was a big conference in Munich, maybe 10 years ago, about this thing, because it's very obvious that there is a connection between the thinking of Schelling and this painting.
It was just in the zeitgeist, so to speak.
Yeah, it is zeitgeist. It's zeitgeist. Schelling was very sensitive for the zeitgeist. She was very. It takes a lot of things from. It's not only a romanticism. It is a kind of antiquism. It's a new form of antique. The antiques coming back.
Antiquism. Okay.
It's coming to Schinkel builds these new antique architecture, and he is speaking like Plato in the translation of Schleiermacher. It's a higher level of German. He's speaking at 1802 when he wrote his dialogue with Bruno. It is a new style in German. It's crazy if you look back, but it happens there. Okay, let's make an end to this thing. Fichte's concept of nature, yes, now in opposite to Schelling. For Schelling, nature is a place of speculative natural science, a place of beauty and enjoyment, the place where humans belong to. Nature is their home, from which they move out through freedom and reflection, only to move back in again to freedom and their own merit. Fichte takes a different view. According to the science of knowledge, I transfer the concept of myself to nature as far as I can without abolishing nature itself in its character. An example, without making it intelligent, I setting itself. Nature, as Fichte explicitly states in his writing Sätze zur Erläuterung des Wesens der Tiere, sentences to explaining the nature of animals around 1800, nature is not a subject, it is not the self, and therefore not the non-self, in example, the object. It is the object. Fichte critically addresses Schelling's doctrine of potencies, Kräfte, powers, potencies. If it is said that intelligence is a higher potency of nature, then this statement has philosophically significance only in a certain sense. It could mean that everything that is in nature is also in humans, supplemented by an additional component, namely intelligence and the cosmos of the intelligible. And insofar as intelligence actually transcends nature, the statement would have a certain justification. Both nature and intelligence are included in this mere enumeration, landing non-justifying systems without hiatus to one another. The sentence is purely descriptive, assigning two components to humans as in a construction kit. But it does not establish any argumentative connection, any generative sequence. This could be that intelligence is a product of nature and in this sense a higher power of nature, a formulation that would be close to the prevailing scientific consensus today. Consciousness in a very general and unspecific sense as a product of evolutionary development. It is astonishing, however, with what verve Fichte formulates his criticism, especially at a time when Lamarck's Philosophie zoologique had not yet been written and Charles Darwin had not even been born. Now, this interesting criticism of this by Fichte. But God against nothing more, both history and certain semi-philosophy, than the completely unreasonable and almost futile effort to elevate unreason to reason by gradually reducing its degree, and if only given a sufficient number of millennia to have an orangutan, ultimately give rise to a Leibniz or Kant. It's very interesting because it's a hard opposite to that was evolutionary thinking is today. The reasonable cannot evolve from the unreasonable. Furthermore, for Fichte, this would violate the principles of transcendental philosophy. Conversely, this means that nature is a product of intelligence. How, then, can intelligence be a product of nature? Through an obvious circle. Intelligence is what actually produces. According to Fichte, this must be formulated in a transcendental philosophy as follows. Finite intelligence is a lower power of the absolute, but this contains something that can only be determined, of which real intelligence, the empirical ego, is the higher power. This something can only be determined is nature. Nature is only a counter-image, ultimately there to give freedom an object. The world as the material of duty. As something merely determinable, it has no activity or productivity of its own. Rather, nature must be incorporated into the basic from the intelligence. Nature does not exist in itself, but only as a recognized entity in which the structures of cognition are reflected as its elements, and as a desired entity, as the goal of the actions of finite rational beings. Thus, plants and animals can also be described in their principles by philosophy, a purely a priori procedure that requires experience to validate its statements and provide evidence, does not need to substantiate his claims. Ultimately, for Fichte, the life of nature is only an apart one. For him, life includes freedom, and through it, participation in the intelligible world. Now I come back to my introducing words about the Anthropocene. For Fichte, nature is a construct. It is therefore not insignificant or uninteresting, but has always been conceptually and linguistically transformed. Schelling, on the other hand, attributes inherent rights and autonomy to nature. Both concepts of nature are modern. They equally assume that humans and nature are not mutually exclusive. There is no untouched nature for Fichte, because nature can only be conceived as the object of moral task, even if that task is to leave nature alone. For Schelling, because everything human represents a stage of nature. Both open up nature to science. Fichte to engineers, Schelling to naturalists and natural philosophers. For Fichte, nature should lose its secrets. Schelling discovers in it a dark ground, matter, and unground. Both positions remain valid in the current Anthropocene debate, albeit with changed signs and perhaps confused reinforced. In Fichte's position, blame can now be attributed to those humans who can only perceive nature as a non-self that must serve human freedom as an object. At the same time, great hopes are placed in technology, which engineers wanted to make a decisive contribution to saving the world. Schelling's position takes anthropocentrism to the extreme. Nature itself is the subject that is perfected in the human mind of becoming conscious of itself a nature, which, according to the late Fichte, has a dark foundation in God. No, according to the late Schelling. It must be Schelling, not Fichte. In this wickedness, man suffers from his own nature, which is beyond his control. Man is a failed being, a cancerous tumor in the earth. Only through catastrophe is healing possible. In this way, Fichte and Schelling returned to the current discussion about the Anthropocene, transformed but recognizable as fixed coordinates of modernity and as a manifestation of ambivalent nature. Thank you.
Well, now more questions and commentaries. I suppose it would be better to discuss now than to make now a break and come back in 10 or 15 minutes. Maybe we should lose the momentum. Okay.
So thank you for the presentation. So going back to that Anthropocene comments, last question. This last sentence partially answers. And my question, I'm going to be as concrete as I can. So, initially I was wondering, so why is this concept being put here? It's like an illustration of the ambivalence, because it is like a quite contested and slightly vague and disputed concept, to say the least, right? And it seems that you have these two poles here, the materialist and the more naturalist. And there is this idea also here that you propose of this lost nature. And then we have the Anthropocene, possibly as an illustration of something that is lost and is reassembled, or some, at least conceptually, right? So my question according to the following: so in search of lost nature, lost in which way? Conceptually, lost between these two poles that seem hard to reconcile. Possibly, I don't know if notions like Anthropocene is a way to reconcile them, because it's a bit muddling. Let's say it's everything. So lost nature, searching for the. Can you elaborate a bit more on what this may be represented here? This lost nature, lost between these two poles, and what is the role of a concept such as Anthropocene is such, if there is such a role. Thank you.
Okay. You are right by questioning me this thing. Of course, we cannot lose nature. We have a concept of nature, but we don't know what it is. You will. You told me last time we speak that Marcus Gabriel will come to Coimbra. He writes a book. It's titled "Warum die Welt nicht existiert," Why the world does not exist. Yeah.
He's also a non-reductionist, right? So
Yeah,
alongside with Bruno Latour and some other.
It's the same problem. Yes, the world does not exist. There are things in it, and we can talk about these things. They are, he called it Sinnfelder, it's something of squares of meaning, something, patterns of meaning we can establish, but we don't have the whole. It is an old thought. I don't know. I don't think that's new by Marcus Gabriel. It is Kant. Obviously, Kant said, "No, we don't have the world in totality. We only have our experience, the field of experience, and there we can." Okay, that's That's an analog way I'm going here, but I'm playing with it. You see, I don't think that it is new that we don't have the nature, but we lose it in this process of modernity. We cannot say what is nature. It's a unquestionable question. What is nature? Because what is it's a question which asks for essence. We have no essence of nature. We have a concept which is used, and we give the, if we are scientists, we give the rules to use our concepts. And I don't want to speak about nature because I don't think it's a productive concept. It's too ambivalent to use it in a rational way. But we have to talk about these things going on in the nature caused by human beings. Yeah. But how should we talk about that in terms of illness? I mentioned it is good. Like cancer, is the human being the cancer of the earth? Is that the right way to talk about that? No. We can talk about it in rational terms. We can in political concepts would be a good idea to do that. As to think about great catastrophes and something else like the end of the world. This is not. That's not the right way. So I think if the Anthropocene is something like the search of the lost nature. They want back to have a known and simple concept of nature, but we cannot give them this concept because we haven't it. We lost it in a long time of thinking about nature. The term Anthropocene was come up by geological scientists. They think about it, and it takes a period of I think 5 years or 10 years since it comes up, and then they say no, it's not a new geological epoch. It is. We cannot use it. Yeah, this is what scientists do. They don't want to have this problem. The problem with the anthropos, nobody knows what it is. The nature, what is nature? They don't know it. They know about seismic things, and they about sediments and all this stuff. They know a lot, but they don't know what is nature. What is anthropos? What is it? They cannot operate with it. The term Anthropocene has no function in natural view. And for a reflective concept, or a concept of reflection, we need more power to think about nature. More power, more consensus, and we don't have it. Just to see my direction. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if this is a quick follow-up or something a little bit to the side of this discussion here, but I was actually reminded we have someone in our research group. She's not here with us today, Inês Salgueiro. Perhaps she's attending online, who did recently a PhD thesis trying to flesh out what would be, let's say, a normative framework for environmental rights from Kant's moral philosophy. or the indirect view on environmental rights coming from Kant. Given Schelling's view that there is a certain autonomy and inherent rights in nature, I wonder if we could think of what type of rights. I mean, could we elaborate a little bit on what this moral ought facing nature and the rights, the natural rights stemming from, that we could attribute to nature stemming from it could be? I mean, is this something completely impossible, or what is your view on such a problem?
Yeah, we have this problem in not only in environmental discussions, it's also in animal rights and something else. I don't think that it's possible from Kant, but maybe it's my person.
She takes the so-called indirect view, because we only have direct duties towards other rational human beings.
No,
yeah,
there's no way. But it's there's one point in Kant and one point in the structure of rights, which makes it impossible to develop kind of this theory. The point in Kant is we have Kant's ethics, but it is not in the critique of practical reason and not in the groundwork of metaphysic of morals. It is in the Sittenlehre, doctrine of morals. There you find the ethics. The other things are groundworks.
Yeah.
They want to establish practical philosophy in respect of a natural determined world. This is you cannot. This is an incompatible point to find a way to in this construction of the second critique to establish rights for something or somebody, and in the groundwork of
also the metaphysical of morals.
There you have only this is a lot of local 19th century 18th century moral things in it. So I don't know how it works from Kant. The other point is, after the subject, you need a subject for the rights. And the problem is, can animals be the subject? Can the environment be the subject of rights? Then it has to speak. We can speak for animals. It's okay. I don't want to harm animals because they cannot speak. It's okay. But to have an ethics, you have to. It's a problem.
Whether you need to have consciousness to have agency and to have rights attributed to you, but that's a different kind of discussion.
It's the other point. I know this. I know this. This thing. Agency is underdetermined concept. I think that's for a right, for a justificable right.
Thank you, Professor Asmuth, for this wonderful talk. I have just two comments. Can you find several expressions of this ambivalent concept and ambivalent and somewhat non-productive concept of nature in several other authors, like even in Bergson, the tension between vitalism and spiritualism, or
several two different authors like Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, this notion of cosmic evolution towards man, or even more recently with Pierre Descola, the tension between culture and nature. It's always the same ambivalent and non-productive concept of nature. Just a comment, but even when you speak about early modernity, and can we find in the genealogy of the thought of Schelling this tension? I understand that Schelling is not a direct reader of Spinoza, but this tension between Spinoza, Deus sive natura, and the animism from Giordano Bruno, how do we deal with those tensions in early modernity, and how Schelling how somehow solve that problem?
Okay.
Excuse me, that's so general.
Yeah, it's okay. I think it's your question. I see this point you make. In the moment when the evolutionary theory began its victory in the sciences, in the modern sciences, they have a new card desk. Yeah, there's a break there's a new way to think about nature as process, as developing. We cannot have it in Schelling and Kant, and not in Spinoza. Not everything which is before Darwin. We have there's no way to combine it. But you have the way of thinking about nature as two opposite methods. One is we have to operate with the nature. That's scientific way to do it, like an engineer, Fichtean approach to the nature. And the other one is we have to see ourselves as nature. And this is Bergson, I think. But Teilhard de Chardin is difficult because he has some points coming from Schelling. It's der werdende Gott. It is the becoming God. Also this God is becoming process. That's a Schellingian point. But Schelling get it from his yacht. It's an old concept coming from his reading of antique authors. There's a lot of points I could say. Schopenhauer, the same thing. The world in a doubled view. There are a lot of authors you can examine to see this double form of thinking of nature. I don't know if
Thank you.
Well, in the seminary, we are now studying the seminary of themes of history of philosophy too. That's our seminary. Also, now we are studying Hans Jonas, the imperative of responsibility, and in some way we see this idea that so humans are part of nature, a special part of nature, but we cannot think in a transcendental way like Fichte, that nature is conditioned by our structures of thought, by our own freedom, and so on. But freedom is born in appears in nature, and our responsibility is just a special part of nature, but it's still belonging to nature. That it's also influenced by Schelling, I would say. Anyway, in this kind of position, where if we could not integrate in some way, or why could we not integrate also Fichte in that idea that consciousness and responsibility and practical reason is it comes from nature, and it's still a part of nature. Well, that would be a question. Nowadays, it would be difficult to. It's more difficult to defend a Fichtean position, a transcendental position that says that there is a gap between the orangutan and Leibniz and Kant, or between nature and reason. I think the discussion is, of course, there are many objections, possible objections to this idea that reason is just something that belongs also to nature, and or against that position. But that would be the most, I would say, the most popular position now, which we find also in some way in Hans Jonas. How would you deal with that position that makes reason also a part and a product of nature, as in Schelling more probably?
As in respect of my thinking about Fichte and Schelling, it is I'm reading Fichte as an extremely constructivist author. It is constructivism in its radicality. It's the more is not more possible, I think, and I believe in that. And we live in now in an intellectual environment which is criticizing constructivism. We had 100 years constructivism within all shadows and shades. And now we are going to criticize it. That is what Marcus Gabriel does, New Realism, and a lot of people doing that, because it is I understand what they want and what they don't like with constructivism, but they don't match Fichte's point. They think, but we see our empirical studies are showing that, and that's not a kind of thinking about. It is it's coming from the nature of the things. Okay, that is the point we are now here, and I think it's interesting to see what's going on between Fichte and Schelling, because they are conscious about the Kantian approach. They are constructivists, like Fichte is and Schelling is too. And they come to this discussion, and they have another accent that I showed this picture because you have to remember that Schelling is a romantic thinker. He is not interested to have a scientific universe. That's not. This is what he wants. He wants the man in the middle of the nature. He's coming back to anthropocentrism in a quite extreme version. Yeah? And I think that is the question coming here. What is constructivism? Do we really want to deny constructivism at all? No, I don't think so. That's but then we have to accept that there's no nature.
In the extreme
construct, yeah.
Just 2 points, if I. So, in some way, Schelling is more anthropocentric than Fichte in that way. Is that what you said? Is an extreme anthropocentrism? However, he's trying to, in some way, deny anthropocentrism, making a nature centrism. The other point is regarding constructivism. I suppose there are two radical different constructivisms. So transcendental constructivism with Kant and Schelling, that's one thing, and cultural or social relativism or constructivism, that's another thing. And both, I suppose, they are radically different, but most people confound them. They don't understand what Kant and Fichte means by transcendental, and they mix that up with cultural, historical, or empirical, or psychological constructivism. Well, those are 2 points I think they are interesting, because also against Jonas, people say, well, he says he's no anthropocentrist. He's against anthropocentrism, but he's absolute anthropocentrism when he says that man is the top product, the most elevated product. Human responsibility is the most important, or the highest point of nature. Well, I don't know if those 2 points gives you some occasion for some commentary also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see your points. In Schelling, it's the same. Also, he's nature-centric, but the nature is hierarchically organized. And the point of self-consciousness is the highest point in nature. Like you see it in the picture. This is it's going from bottom up to the highest point, and this is this self-consciousness. Maybe it is like God, fully self-consciousness as called consciousness of everything. That is meant by it. And yeah, with your remarks about constructivism, it's right. It's different forms of constructivism, but they interact a little bit. Yeah. If you see, Fichte is not. He has a very interesting, very contemporary concept of the body, of the human body. There's a letter from the early Fichte where he's jogging around the Zurich Sea. Zurich is a town in Switzerland. He was teacher in Zurich, and he going around the sea, and he writes about, I say it in modern terms, about a flow experience. Running. I had the idea. The idea of my Wissenschaftslehre came while he was jogging. Also, you see, there is not an intellectualist who say the intellect is everything like Leibniz did, if you interpret it like that. It is some who has a concept of embodiment. He is embodied embodied man running around the sea, and that is the crucial point in his Sittenlehre, that he says we have to recognize everybody as human who has human body. That is the body. The embodiment is the crucial point in his development of sociality. It's a modern form to do that. It's not this bad nature. We have we have to correct the nature every time we can. It is the adequate nature for us to have our bodies like that. It is very, very. They are near Schelling and Fichte, but have a clear conceptual difference. And this is, for me, the interesting point here.
Maybe that has also to do exactly with the question who acts or who is the subject of action, the question you put. So when Schelling writes nature subject, that's really a separation. How can nature be a subject? Of course, if we understand action in a Kantian way, or probably just the meaning of the word action, and it's different from an event, something that happens, then you cannot say that nature is subject, and then you have the great gap between the two actors. And we are reading also Latour, who has many pages trying to prove that nature also acts. Nature is an agent, and not just nature, but also in social phenomena, nobody's acting. There is a kind of a collective unconscious subject of action, and then he has to prove that action is something totally different of what we think, to prove his Anthropocene vision of nature, and his revolutionary pathos. Well, it's just nature subject then is really important here in Schelling, I think, for this discussion.
It has to do with his lecture of the third critique of Kant. It is the Zweckmäßigkeit. What is organism? Organism is, I don't know, telos in itself. And this is for Kant. We export these concepts into the nature as if it is. As if.
Brown is going to write a work on that question of
Yeah.
critical arrangement. Yeah.
This is important here. As here, the critical point is Schelling denied this critical point. He said it is like the whole nature is organism. Yeah, he writes a book about the world, Weltseele. Soul of the world. Soul of the world. Yeah? It is the imagined antique concept of the world as organism. Yeah? This is
Gaia. It seems like
it's,
Gaia.
yeah, it is Gaia, of course.
James
It is,
Lovelock.
Yeah.
And then Lovelock writes that Latour was the one who best understood his Gaia idea. Now, in a more recent work, this is Gaia idea. There's an organism. So those questions are still very
they are valid. Yes.
very in focus. Yeah.
That is the point. The point is what is with telos in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And Fichte is Kantian. He cannot say there are telos in nature. We can transport telos to nature, but we don't. Nature has no telos. That's a modern scientific point of view. No telos in nature. Evolution comes without telos. It's only
Adaptation.
Adaptation and selection and so on. Yeah, it's a kind of aleatoric.
Well, yet I'm sorry if it. Well, we have still some minutes. I would say we started at 10. If it's not too late, yet there is still some way to go between purposefulness, purposeful action that exists in nature, and responsibility and reasonable responsibility. There's still some way to go. That we can have purpose in nature, but not yet moral responsibility. So that's a step, but not the whole way, I would say. And then how to ground ethical responsibility in nature. We studied that a little bit in Luc Ferry. He discusses that. You cannot have responsibility for nature in nature. Nature is indifferent to itself.
You are a good Fichtian.
Okay. Okay.
Tough
You
Fichte.
cannot blame the lion for eating the gazelle. That's what you're saying.
No, I'm just arguing.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. So we both I agree. We both studied Fichte early. Well, there are no arguments against this last statement. We will study next week already Latour, and we will read Latour's arguments against that position.
That's good.
Well, I want to thank you a lot. It's an honor to have you here, and it's really a privilege. And also I want to thank always again João Emanuel, that it's always also the soul of our seminaries, and everybody who came, especially the colleagues that honored with their presence. So thank you also, and we go on with the discussion, no more with Professor Asmuth, but with the students next week. So thank you also for the people who assisted to our conference today online. Until the next seminary on rationality, critique and dialogue from antiquity to contemporaneity on the 25th November with Marcus Gabriel and also some colleagues from Kyoto in Japan. That will also be an interesting moment. Thank you.
Thank you.